Bonjour everyone, welcome to today's video where I show you how to sew a bustier. In the previous video I showed you how to create the pattern for it using my bodice pattern, so definitely check it out if you have not yet seen it. I showed you two different versions of the bustier for the cups. I will only be showing you how to sew only one of them, but at the end of the video I'll show you the result of the two different versions and what they look like on me. So stay tuned till the end and let's get started with the video. Let's get started with the materials. I have my zipper here, my zipper that I'll be using in the back, and my pattern pieces for the front and for the back. Next, I have my fabric. I will be using the blue fabric as my main fabric, obviously. Initially, I wanted to use the printed one, but I changed my mind because it's thinner. So I just figured the blue makes a better fabric for the main part. Then I have my polyester batting that I'll be using for the lining, and I decided to use some interfacing for my fabric, which will make the bust cup smoother. So that's what my interfacing is for. I went ahead and cut out all my pattern pieces for my lining and for my main fabric. And then I went ahead and cut out my interfacing and my polyester batting. For the batting, I did not add any seam allowance. And for the interfacing, I added about 1/8 of an inch in seam allowance. I added notches to my pieces where I had my notches marked. I did so for all the pieces where I had notches. For my batting that I'm using for the lining, I don't want to just use the press of foot over it just like that. So I am putting a piece of tape, wrapping it around my press of foot for when I am sewing over my batting, there won't be any issue. So that's what I did here. And I pretty much left this on for my whole sewing time. But that helps me to just sew smoothly over the body. For my cup pieces, although I have the left and right marked on the pattern piece, when it comes to sewing it, after it's sewn, after the pieces are sewn, it can be hard to differentiate between left and right and placing them correctly. So I like to mark two notches on my left side and one on the right side. So two notches on the outer side and one on the inner side. So I know which one goes where and position them correctly for when I'm sewing. Now it's time to put my interfacing, fuse my interfacing to my main fabric pieces. I will be using my iron to do so and just fuse them together. After fusing my interfacing onto the fabric pieces, I'm only interfacing the bust cups. That's what they are looking like, pretty neat. Now it's time to pin them together. I'm starting with the bottom of the cups first, pin them together and then ready to start sewing. After sewing the bottom of the cups, that's what they are looking like. I pressed my seam open before I cut into them and press them. I just did everything at my sewing machine before I actually end up ironing on the cups. So it's time to put on the top piece, and I use the notches on the side to help me identify which side is which, what to connect. So it's time to put on the top piece together and then sew. After sewing the top piece of the cup, I just pressed it open. I pressed open my seam, and that's all that I did to it. Later on, I ended up cutting into the curves and, of course, press it. I am now preparing my lining pieces together, and I plan on using zigzag stitches. I don't have seam allowance between the seams, the pieces, so to attach them together, I use zigzag stitches, but I didn't just want to zigzag stitch over them like that because batting is pretty thin. It's just one layer, and it's just not a foam cup that is very stable for me to feel like the zigzag stitch would go as planned. So I ended up putting a piece of fusible interfacing in between the pieces, and so over it like that, and it's fusible interfacing. So once iron on, it just melts into it. It just fuses into it. So that's what I ended up doing for my pieces. Now that I'm done sewing the cup lining, this is what things are looking like, and I am ready to put all of the pieces together to create my entire cup. So I did cut out some linings for my lining from my lining fabric because I don't want the batting to be touching my skin. If this was foam cup, I would not need the lining fabric, but because I'm using batting, it's pretty much an interlining in my opinion. So that's why I needed the lining fabric because I just don't want the batting touching my skin when I put the garment on. So I'm just cutting into my curves, clipping into my curves to make sure everything lays smooth. Once done with clipping my curves, I prepared my pieces for how I'm going to put them together. So I put my batting, which is my interlining at this point, touching my lining at the seams because they have the same seam. So I just clip them, pin them together, and then ready to sew. When it comes to sewing, I just sewed over the seams on the right side, on the lining side, and that's how I attach it all together. And it was not that difficult, honestly, even though the batting layer was underneath, it still worked out pretty fine. It was easy, but not no challenges. So that's how I put it all together. That's what it looks like. And I decided I wanted to just put more stitches in there just to keep the pieces laying flatter, just making them look more smooth. So I ended up going over it a few times with stitch lines in from the center out. And I feel like that gave it a decent look, in my opinion, on the inside. It just looked like a seashell almost. So I like that, but it helped to keep everything together. I feel like if I did not do that, I would get some like cushion type look. And I just did not want that. So the more stitches I placed, the more helpful it was at keeping the pieces together and just making it more solid and not too much like a cushion, even though that's what it is. But doing the multiple stitch lines helped a lot, in my opinion. It made it more stable. So for the lining at the top, I did add some seam allowance, but you don't need seam allowance there. Just like you do for a foam cup, you don't need seam allowance at the top. So I did not need my seam allowance there. So I am removing it. One thing I did not do right was not doubling up my seam allowance for the main part though. For your main fabric, you're supposed to double up the seam allowance because of the way you fold things in after you sew the main piece to the lining. So I will let you watch how that worked out because I did end up going with my regular seam allowance first and then realizing my mistake and then take it out, make my seam allowance much smaller so that I could work things out properly. So the way I had cut my pieces was for it to look like this, and that is the wrong way. The main piece is supposed to be folded down into the lining. So that I did it the wrong way. It's supposed to look like this, but I cut my piece not adding the double up seam allowance. So you're supposed to have, for me, I would want to have my seam, the same amount of seam allowance show up into my lining. So I ended up going take out the initial seam allowance and making it smaller, half the size that it was, so that I can put half of it folded into my cup. And it's because the edge of the cup, the foam cup or the batting in my case, is supposed to be staying up. It's supposed to stay up. The edge is supposed to stay up. It doesn't go into a seam allowance. So after correcting everything, that's what it's looking like. That's what my lining looks like. I prefer it that way better. And the best way to really make sure everything is aligned is by making sure the seam lines inside the cup is matching the seam lines inside that is on the main fabric. So to make sure everything stands the way they're supposed to stand up. Now I am going to align my stitch lines on the outer cup and the inner cup together and making sure they are aligned, and then I'm going to do a base stitch around the edge of my cup, and that will be it for my cup. After I saw the edge of my cup, this is what it's looking like. I was very satisfied with the stability I had. I thought it would be very thin, maybe a bit floppy, but given that I did not use foam, I think the batting gave me pretty good stability. I really like that. And I think stitching over it multiple times helped a lot too. So now that my cups are done, it's time to put the body spot together. And that's pretty easy to do. I do like how I got the smooth curve underneath the on the bust curve. I love how it ended up turning out because of what I did to make sure it turned out that way. So I really like that. The cup sticks are looking very narrow and very small. It is what it is. I have a modest body, so that's what it is. 6 feet tall, modest. Very interesting. But I ironed my piece, my bodice piece, and then I also did the same for the lining as well. And now it's time to put them together. I'm just gonna put right sides together and sew the seam allowances at the top and at the bottom. This is after stitching my seam allowances at the top and at the bottom of my pieces, and I'm just flipping it right side out, and I am going to just press it, and I am done with the front, and then it's time for the back piece. Once I'm done with the back piece, I'll be attaching it to the front bodice, and then I'll add my cups last. Now it's time to put the pieces together to create the back of my garment. I have my pieces laid out. I had cut them out. I have my piece I'll be cutting my elastic from, and I'm starting with the middle piece first. I did lay out my pieces in the way in which they will look after I'm done sewing, and so I'm starting with the middle piece now, which is piece 2A, 2B, 2A and 2B. These are the pieces I'll be adding my elastic to, so I have the right size together with the lining and the main piece, and I'm gonna sew the top and the bottom of those pieces. This is what things are looking like after I sewed them and I start turning them right side out. My fabric does say Kate Spade because they were gifted to me by an amazing friend. Shout out to him. And most of the products that I've made on the channel are made from fabrics that I received from him. So I am grateful for amazing people. I'm thankful for that. So this is what everything looks like after I turn it right side out. And then I went ahead and ironed them as well. So now I am ready to start creating my casings. And what I did is put my fabric on top of my fabric here, and I start marking for how much I want my casing to measure. So I do that for about 3 rows, and then I go in with my tape measure and continue the whole side with my tape measure after I measure the amount that I marked from the elastic. So this is what I'm doing here, using my tape measure to measure to see how much the spaces are, the space for the casing is, and it's about 5/16 of an inch. So in the midst of it, I decided to cut out my elastic, and I just put it over the piece that I cut out from my pattern, and I left seam allowance on each side, and that's how I measure my elastic width. So that's what it's looking like. And now I went in with my pencil and marked all the way down on my fabric for the casing, for the casings. And to put it on the other side, to transfer it on the other side, I just fold my fabric and pin it and then just snip. So I snip over my markings all the way down my piece, and that's how I transferred the marking to the other side of my piece. And that's what it looks like after I'm done snipping. And then I went ahead and took the other side and faced it with this side that I'm done with, and that's how I transferred that marking onto the other side instead of me using my tape measure and doing a whole bunch of marking. That's how I created my marks on my pieces. So I put those 2 pieces together facing each other, and then I use my scissor and did the same thing, just snip. For all of the markings that I'm placing with my scissors transferring, I will be using my pencil to mark on them. Just as you see here, I went ahead and used my pencil. What that did was make everything visible for me so I can connect them with a line. I was gonna use my dressmaking pencil initially, but it was just too light. It was not doing what I wanted it to do, but the fabric is light, so I guess they work best on a darker fabric. I was gonna use the other blue pencil, but it wasn't sharp enough and I couldn't find my sharpener. So I ended up using some Taylor's chalk that I had, and it's blue, so it just works out well, even though it washes off, but It just works out. Even though me using the scissors seemed like a shortcut, which it was, it's very important to be careful and make sure everything is aligned so that you can get clean results. So this is what everything looks like after I'm done drawing my lines, connecting my markings with the tailor's chalk. I was satisfied. So next I'm using my pins to pin down the pieces. Although the piece is one, it has been sewn together, top and bottom. Because I'm sewing the casings now, it's important that I just pin it along the vertical side so that I can make sure that the pieces are remaining aligned for my casing to be neat. So that's what I'm doing here. And one tip is to cut out some of the seam allowance from the inside so that you reduce bulking. I did so for one piece and not the other, and I could not see a difference in my result, honestly. So it's not necessary. I would say only if you have a large amount of seam allowance, then yeah, that might be helpful to minimize bulk. But it's time to sew now. This is after sewing all of the lines to create my casings and trimming the thread ends. That's what my piece is looking like. So the lining is what really helps me to know what's top and bottom, but it's really a rectangle, so it doesn't really matter, but it just helps. This is one piece that I completed with my elastic. In total, I had 21 rows of elastic for each side. Each side had 21 rows of elastic, so that's quite a bit of work. Yeah. And you can see here what I meant. I mentioned this in my pattern making video where I said that the piece shrinks after you put the elastic in. That's what I meant. So if I had to redo my pattern, I would have added a 1/4 inch extra to my pattern. There is really no specific formula to how to figure out the length. For me, it's trial and error. Maybe a pro can figure it out, but for me, it's trial and error. I just would have added a 1/4 of an inch, and there's no way you can add you cannot add too much, otherwise it will mess up your pattern. If you add too much, then you cannot lengthen the other pieces to make it match unless you really that you would really work out that seam allowance to make it next to nothing to make it match. So it's really a trial and error thing. I would have just added a 1/4 of an inch. So if I was making this pattern to make it available for people, I just would have tested it myself and then just grade it to make it available for different sizes, and recommend the same elastic size that I use. So yeah, now it's time to show you how I put the elastic in the casings. And I just use my safety pin and attach it to the elastic, and then just go through the casings with it. So I'm going in between the layers here and just going on with my elastic. So I've done this several times on the channel. I'm pretty sure you know how to do it. Since it's part of the garment, I'll just show at least one row of it. So enjoy. This is what things are looking like after I'm done putting my elastics in. 42 rows total of elastics, 21 on each side. Now it's time to address the shrinkage that took place after having placed my elastics in, and I put my piece over the pattern piece that it's supposed to measure out to, which was what I cut my elastic from. And of course I have seam allowance, that's why it seems wider, but I'm just marking from where it reaches on my point, and the marks are not equal or on the same level because my waist is cut on a more shapely, more of on a circular shape than straight. So that's an issue. I should have really made my pattern for it to be straight at the waist because I'm adding the elastic in, but I did not do that. So I just connected the pieces for my bag together, and I squared out from the center back. That's how it's supposed to be, squaring out from the center back and leveling it down to reach the waist point, and then I just mark a line connecting all of the pieces together. So that's how I'm trying to fix the shrinkage issue, by shortening the other pieces to make everything equal. But of course it's important to make sure that my side back is gonna match my side front, and my front is already done, so That's why I leveled everything to the waist point to make sure that my side seam is going to be the same length. And because I had already cut my fabrics out from the other pattern pieces, now since I have made adjustments, I am also making the adjustment onto the fabric pieces as well. Next, I will be connecting my side piece to the elastic detail I just created, but first I am going to put right sides together for my lining and my main piece, and then sew top and bottom, and this is the result. After turning it right side out and ironing them, that's what they are looking like, and I'm ready to connect them to my elastic piece now, to my elastic detailed piece. I am going to sandwich that stretchy piece now inside that side piece that I just sewed. It's very possible that I could have just sewed this with the seam allowance, just sew the seam allowances together, but I just figured that would be too bulky, and to me this seemed like the best way to do so and minimize bulk. As you can see, my seam allowance is open and I'm stretching it to make sure it fits well over the top, because I don't want to open it and have one side be longer than the other. I want it to be leveled. That's really hard to achieve. That's why perhaps sewing the seam allowances down maybe is a good idea, but I just felt this way would minimize bulk. So it took some effort to actually make sure things are aligned from when I'm sewing it, and I did stretch a bit or ease things in, but I don't feel like my result were that bad, so I feel like I would still do this over again if I had to redo it. It's now time to sew everything down, and it is quite thick, so I would advise you use a thick needle if you're doing something like this. I'm using a size 14 needle. At first my line looked pretty bad, and then I went over it again. I had skipped stitches, my line wasn't straight, so I decided to go over it again with 4mm stitch length, and I got better results the next round. This is what it looks like. It looks much more straight. It just looks cleaner. Before turning it into the right side, I trimmed the corners of my seam allowance, mostly the elastic, and then I flipped it on to turn it right side out. And this is what things look like. I did not want to have the one side being taller than the other, but unfortunately I did have to deal with, I did end up having that issue. So this is what my pieces are looking like after sewing them so far, and I really liked it. I like the inside even. I'm so glad I used that color for the lining instead. So next it's time for the zipper. I have my zipper here. I did mention in the previous video that I made a mistake with my zipper and the pattern. In the previous video for my pattern making video, I measured the width of the zipper teeth to show how much you need to remove off the pattern, but that's the wrong measurement to take. The right measurement is the width of the zipper pull at the back, because the part that touches the zipper teeth, you can't even see it from the back because the back is wider than the front. So you measure the width of the zipper pull at the back. And that measurement for me is 5/8 of an inch or 10/16 of an inch, 5/8 of an inch. So that's what I have for the width of my zipper pull at the back. And of course, we're not gonna have the zipper pull touching the fabric or the edge of my seam, so it's wise to add some white space so that the zipper pull have space to move along. So I added 1/16 of an inch on each side. So with that added, my total measurement is 3/4 of an inch for what will be exposed of my zipper. And all of that is because I'm doing an exposed zipper, and you want to make sure you remove that measurement from your pattern, from your center back. And because I'm working on one side of my pattern, so I have to divide this measurement by 2, and that gives me 3/8 of an inch. So that's the measurement, that's how much I need to remove from my center back from the beginning when I was making my pattern. That's what that measurement should have been, but I did 3/16 of an inch instead. So now I'm going to remove the extra that I was supposed to remove had I done this correctly from the beginning. I know this seems like a lot, and I am sorry for the confusion. I wish I had done everything perfectly, but one day I will have a tutorial that has no mistake at all. I look forward to that day. Now that I have adjusted my pattern piece, it's now smaller, so I place it over the fabric piece that I had cut for it. And instead of trimming it, I decided to leave it because it's a zipper that's gonna go there. So I just used my scissor to just snip the points where the seam allowance should start. And I went ahead and just put right sides together and sewed halfway through instead of sewing all the way across that piece. I did it that way because it just seemed like the best way for me to add the zipper after everything, after I attach it to the elastic, the stretch part. I sewed everything, that's what it looks like, and I trimmed the corners of my seam allowances, including the corner of the elastic part as well. I then trimmed the seam allowance just to minimize bulk and then turn it right side out, and this is what things are looking like. And so far so good, and it stretches really well. Of course it should stretch, it's elastic. And now it's time to install my zipper. I did make a separate video on how to put the zipper together and how to install it, so I won't go much into detail about that. I will just let what I have play out for you to see. After pinning my lining to my zipper, I decided to create a zipper flap because I don't want my zipper touching my skin, and also the zipper has space in between, so it just works out that way. So I use my pattern piece for the back, that small pattern piece number 1. I then interface my piece, my flap on one side. I did fusible interfacing and I sewed the top and bottom, and once I was done sewing it, I cut off the corners and turned it right side out and ironed it, and this is what it looks like. To add it to the back of my zipper, I just sandwiched it in between my lining and the zipper itself as my seam allowance is folded in at the lining, and that's what it looks like after that was done. And I have it pinned, and then I will do some edge stitching to keep it all down. That's how I did everything. I did hand sew the zipper part, so you can watch that video that I uploaded on it already to see how to hand sew a zipper, a separated zipper. After edge stitching it all together, this is what everything is looking like. Not the cleanest work at all, but I'm just glad it got the job done. And this is all for my back piece. You can see my zipper is a bit wobbly, wonky. It's because it's longer than my actual piece for my back, than the length of my back piece. So my back piece is completely done. I'm ready to attach it to the front piece now. Instead of sandwiching the side pieces, the side seams together, I decided to sew them as if they were sewn piece by piece, as if the lining was sewn to the lining of the front and the main piece was sewn to the main piece. So I open my seams, and that's what I'm going to try to do. So attach the lining together and attach the the main piece together, and then from there just sew them in a round. That is the best way I could have taken to do this. There's no other way I could have taken to do this and have a neat look on the inside. So I just did what came to mind to do. So as you see, I opened the seam allowances at the top and then put right sides together, the lining to the lining and the main piece to the main piece. I feel like that helped a lot with minimizing bulk. So I am glad that's how I did it. So I did both sides, pinned both sides down, that's what it looks like, and then I took it to my sewing machine and just sewed. This is the result after sewing, after putting the side seams together, and then I'm just gonna turn it, and then my piece is pretty much complete. This is what everything looks like after turning it in to the right side, and it looks decent, not bad. And now it's time to add the cups. Before adding the cups, I am going to pin the lining and the self together. I'm definitely marking the notches where I had them and just put a pin there. I am now ready to start adding my cup to the bodice, and I'm going to match that seam right there and pin it together. Next, I'm going to match the seam that is in my bust cup to that notch that I had placed there specifically for it, and then it's just about pinning all around pretty much. After sewing my cups in, I went around my bust cup just to make sure that all of my fabric is laying the way it's supposed to lay and nothing is bunching up. And for me, it all looked fine, except that it seemed like the bodice looked too small when I was easing in my bust cup. So definitely stay tuned to see the result. I went in and did the top stitch for one of the bust cup, and I'll show you how I do the other one. This is something you would do for when you're ready to put in underwire. This is a step that you would follow through. I'm not putting underwire in. I don't have any to put on. Honestly, I'm not even sure what size I would get, but I did cut a piece of 1 inch by strip. I fold it in half, and then I'm folding the top edge of it, and I'm going to sew it into my cup, around my cup edge, my seam allowance, just like so. I pinned it in, and then I sewed it in. So this is the first part of the sewing. I sewed in my bias strip to attach it to the edge or seam allowance of my bust cup. Now I'm going to fold it over and under my seam allowance that I have on the bust cup, and then I will do the top stitching after that. This is what it looks like after I am done doing the top stitching and the binding. Of course, if you were doing the underwire, you would make your seam allowance a bit bigger than mine, not as narrow as mine is. And this is what everything looks like. I can see that there's a difference in my seam allowance. The way I stitch, it was not completely straight or as it should be, but it's not that bad in my opinion. But this is what it looks like. You can see that under my bust there's just too much tension going on. It feels like my fabric is screaming, but I really love what it looks like on the inside. This is the first version that I showed you how to sew. I didn't show you how to sew the second version, but I'm gonna show you the result of it and what it looks like. It's definitely different from this. The outcome is different, the result is different. But you can see the under bust, that's where I can see the difference most. I did decide to do a hook and eye for my zipper attachment at the end of my zipper attachment, and that's what I did here. So this is my second version. I really like the denim. I like that I use denim and it's not a stretchy denim. Because I just wanted to make sure I use the same fabric that's not stretchy. And I can see on the left side, you can see underneath it, there's a bit of issue going on because I did not stretch it enough or ease in enough. But yeah, otherwise this is really great. This looks way better than the other one. There's not much tension going on underneath my bust cup. And you can see my seam allowance here, there was an issue. One is more narrow than the other. And the difference is very obvious on the right side because it's denim, it's not gonna hide my mistake that well. So let's see what they look like on. So this is the first version. You can see the lines that are screaming. It needs space, it's just too tight. So that's why I have the lines happening. I also have something at my bust showing as if it's my nipple, but it's really not. I think the fabric is just thin, and when it curves, it just created that with the interfacing in it. But clearly this is not the winner. I like the back, mine is the zipper. I wish it was better, but that's version 1. This is the second one. It worked out so much better. I added the extra measurement and that worked out really well. I didn't have any issues even when sewing it and easing the bust in. It was much better with this one than it was the first version. And of course you can see my side mistake there. I did cut this on the fold and I did not finish it with a zipper. I wish this was the one I put the effort in and completed, but there is what it is. This is it for this video. Thank you for watching. Till next time, bye.